Fear. Just woke up every morning with an incredible burning fire of fear in my stomach. How am I going to face this day?
So before I was the life of the party, and then all of a sudden I started becoming the death of the party. And then I started drinking by myself.
Did I ever drink alone? Of course. For me, it is like saying, you know, well, did you breathe? I drank, that's what I did.
And I went and I drank. And by the end of the evening, I realized I was outside the dealer's house, back on heroin again.
You know, somewhere in my head, there was something going on saying like, there's a problem, you know. If you wake up in the morning and you're drinking vodka in your coffee, there's a problem.
I mean, if I had access to all the drink in the world, I would have stayed in that room until it was all gone, or until I was gone.
It was always an issue. What I was going to eat, when I was going to eat, how much I was going to eat was always an issue.
I would be in immense pain and my stomach would be distended and I'd be struggling to breathe, and I would still carry on because I couldn't stop myself.
And I was an addict. I'd become a full-blown addict.
I'll never forget the night where I was on my bathroom floor on my knees and I was crying and begging and saying, you know, God, if this is what you had planned for me, then I don't want this anymore. Then take me, because I don't want to live this way anymore.
Addiction, the many years of experience working amongst our members and the community at large, it has caused so much destruction, so much pain, so many relationships that have been destroyed because of this, I call it the scourge and this modern evil that has beset us.
Welcome to the Coming Clean Addiction series. In this series, we uncover what addiction really is. We include the obvious addictions like alcohol and drugs, but we also focus on other addictions, such as gambling, eating disorders, sex addiction, as well as addictions as innocent as over-exercise. These programs also offer solutions for the addict, families and communities, and emphasize that there is a way out. There is recovery from addiction.
Well, addiction is a human condition affecting many people, not just those who have it. And it's characterized by behavior that is harmful to the individual and others and society, that the person is not able to sustainably quit or modify on their own.
It's when you use a substance or an event to make yourself feel better, to alter your mood, and when you're compulsively attached to that, but more specifically when the use of that substance, that mood or mind-altering substance, or that event, gambling, high-risk behavior, compulsive sex attachment, pornography, when it starts having negative consequences in your life, in spite of the negative consequences, you continue using it.
You have structural brain changes, your brain doesn't work normal and doesn't function normal, and it's recognized by repetitive and compulsive substance use usually, even despite horrendous and significantly negative consequences for the person.
An addiction primarily is using an external substance or practice or habit or person to avoid facing other issues which are becoming painful, becoming dysfunctional, and becoming a shameful area.
You can classify addiction primarily into two types. There's your substance addictions, which would include your alcohol and all your range of drugs, or mood or mind-altering substances, including over-the-counter medications, headache tablets. So your substance addictions, and then the other primary classification are your process addictions, which are your behavioral addictions, which would be things like gambling addiction, sex and love addiction, compulsive relationships, compulsive masturbation, compulsive use of pornography, shopaholics, compulsive shoplifters, etc., etc.
Heroin, alcohol, even nicotine, cocaine, cannabis, gambling, or sex,
or some people might even indulge in eating.
Even things like workaholics, shopaholics, certain eating disorders.
Addiction tends to be concentrated in the substances and behaviors that bring pleasure. And in some people, it brings about an inordinate level of euphoria and pleasure.
So it started with the food. I had my first drink at 13 and got drunk for the first time. I started taking prescription medicine at 13.
I've only recently realized in the last year that my addiction is called a compulsive overeater, and I'm also part anorexic.
Well, my drugs of choice are crack and heroin, and I used those for 9 years. I have other addictions as well. I have an eating disorder, also codependent. I don't drink very successfully, so pretty much everything. I also have a problem with self-harming as well.
I don't remember this, but I got told at 9 years old, I was stealing alcohol from the table, and I could never stop. Even at that age, I'd always wake up on the floor. And then obviously through the years I experimented, from the age of 12, I experimented with a whole bunch of other drugs, petrol, benzene, thinners, marijuana, alcohol, just worked my way up the ladder,
The man next door, the person who you wouldn't expect to become. So it doesn't discriminate. It's an illness that has got very complex roots. For many years, there was a leaning towards the genetic component. People were saying, well, you're either born an addict or you're not. But more and more we're learning, especially with process addictions, that it's more the nurture argument, that very often you might not have a genetic predisposition to addiction, but if all the components in your environment, all the dysfunctional components in your environment exist to create fertile soil, addiction can take root in any event. The one consistent feature that often comes up is that it is a generational problem. So if you have an addict or an alcoholic, there's a strong possibility somewhere in their family, the adults that they modeled themselves on, there would be some addictive behavior or some dysfunction.
Certain factors make you more vulnerable to addiction. For instance, a genetic predisposition. If you have addiction in your family, you have a much higher likelihood of, it doesn't mean you will get the disorder, but you've got a higher likelihood if there's little social support, unemployment, poverty. Those are things that can make you more vulnerable, make you at higher risk.
Anyone can become addicted. It's not just specific persons that become addicted. Anyone, no one will know before whether they will become addicted to something or not.
Oh, am I an alcoholic? Oh God, no. Can't possibly be. I'm a woman. Women aren't alcoholics. It was actually too scary to ponder on for too long.
I was high up in education, very high up, in a very prestigious school, and for some reason, it was fine to tell the children no drugs, but that did not apply to me. Dagga, when I smoked it, was not a drug, and therefore it was fine.
I think society feels the pain of addiction. However, addiction is not necessarily well understood by society. People with addictive disorders are very stigmatized. They're viewed as people who are morally weak, who seem to be unable to pull themselves together, who deliberately harm loved ones. And there's a lack of understanding that this is a brain disease with brain changes.
Yes, I do think society is quite naive about the nature of the seriousness of dependency. If we look at films, if we look at advertisements, it looks as if taking illicit drugs and taking alcohol and indulging in destructive behaviours is normal. They normalise actually something which is potentially extremely dangerous.
I think society inadvertently encourages addiction. We live in an addictive society. If you look around you at advertisements, at the message we're getting from the media, more is better, I want it now, instant gratification.
It's a big problem, and I do think our society is largely disconnected from its own spirituality. We hardly know what's right and wrong anymore. We hardly know what's appropriate and what's inappropriate. If it feels good, do it. If somebody gets hurt in the process, well, bad luck often.
There would be three things that one would primarily look for. The one is out of control behavior or loss of control in an activity that you're engaging in. So whether it could be drinking or drugging, or the way you engage sexually, or the way you gamble. So there's a loss of control in the behavior which results in negative consequences. The other is tolerance to the specific activity. If you need more and more of that activity or that substance to get the same rush. And the other is where you experience withdrawal if you cease that activity. So if you stop drinking or you stop drinking and you're irritable and you're restless and you're discontent. So in other words, if you take away the substance or the addictive activity and there's a personality change in the person, there's probably an addiction that exists. There's probably a compulsive attachment. And in spite of those negative consequences, the individual continues to engage in that behavior.
Also, you're constantly preoccupied with it, thinking about it the whole time and thinking of ways and how you're going to get hold of, for instance, a drug, how you're going to get money to gamble, how you're going to get money for your alcohol, and you hide it from people. It becomes a kind of a compulsion. You cannot live without it. It forms an extremely big part of your life. And later you neglect your, like I said, relationships, your work, your finances, all because of this drug or alcohol or the addictive substance.
It often starts with simple things like relationship difficulties, not being as good a father or a mother as one wishes to be, work problems, and ends up with job losses, marriages that are destroyed, incredible amount of health consequences, mental health, physical health problems.
Your spirit sort of dries up because your mind takes control of you. And it's an escapist mind, wanting to cover up, to hide, to deceive, to escape. And your spirit is sort of crushed in this. And you've got your body demanding another drink, demanding satisfaction. Your mind saying, I've got the answer. It's in that bottle.
Clubbing every single night. Got involved with dealers, started dealing, started trafficking drugs. As much as I was earning, I was using more and owing dealers money, and then, you know, finding other ways and means and manipulating and stealing to pay off what I was using.
I used to go to gym 5-6 times a week. I used to do up to 10 aerobic classes a week, all because there was a guy there that I really liked.
And I got involved in gymnastics. I did very well. I got provincial colours, and that boosted my confidence. I started getting a good physique from it, strong, and I was absolutely obsessive about it. That was an addiction.
I progressed to needing a lot more to get to the state that I got when I passed out at 13, and I was dependent on alcohol to live, to get through my day.
You don't use drugs once and now you're a drug addict. You don't smoke a bit of dacha behind the school shed and now you're a drug addict. It's a process. It happens over time. You have this vulnerability, you're exposed to drugs, and then slowly, bit by bit, these profound changes take place.
I would get sloshed, drunk every weekend. And then it became from a Thursday to a Friday to a Saturday to a Sunday thing, you know. Then it's every occasion there needs to be alcohol involved.
I started on a weekend thing. And then from there it became like every second, third, until it became to a daily thing.
but it ended up speeding up, and more often I started using cough mixtures, a lot of speed, uppers, diet pills, the Mandrax, just everything that was around in those years before what's available today so easily.
We shouldn't just focus on the end product, the addiction, but we should focus on the process. The earlier on you can pick up the problem, the easier it is to fix.
Almost everything you read about in the paper. Death, mayhem, murder, destruction, family violence, domestic violence, car accidents. I think the biggest consequence of addiction, or the biggest damage of addiction, is to the kids in a family growing up, because that cannot be measured. It can't be measured like car accidents and domestic violence and barroom brawls and getting knifed. That's the silent victims of the children, and as they grow up with alcoholism or with addiction, they become the next generation of addicts, and so the cycle repeats itself. So if we want to do anything in our society to break that pattern, we need to get to those people at a young age, because they have been incalculably damaged by the impact of addiction on their lives, because that can't be measured.
There was this guy once that wanted me to be his getaway car while he robs people. And in return, he'll give me money and drugs. And I did it.
And people end up throwing away all their values, their morals. They may engage in crime to obtain enough money to fund their habit. And it cycles down. People often end up homeless, families alienated, children in care, lack of any support left, and they may commit suicide, they may end up in prison. The whole society, the family, the whole community, everyone is negatively affected by this disorder.
Well, I'd had a number of suicide attempts, one in the sea, one with pills. I had no sustainable relationships whatsoever. My home life was pretty miserable. I fought with my father, I fought with my mother.
To the point where my wife said, I can't have this anymore. So she said, she actually called the police one night, and I was asked to be removed from the premises. And it was a terrible feeling for me. My son at the time must have been 3 years old, and there I was being escorted by the police with a bag in my hand and nowhere to go.
And there were obviously lots and lots of consequences within my family, predominantly the fact that I had to lie as often as I did about my behavior. Because when I drank, I never knew who I was going to become. I knew while I was lying who I wanted to be, but I never knew when I drank what I was going to become, where I was going to wake up.
There is professional help available, and it's important to look for the right kind of help.
First, it's about the diagnosis and understanding what it's all about. And then there are many options where you want, what type of treatment you want.
There's a whole range of treatment options available. Can be inpatient treatment, outpatient, could be done through a whole host of different interventions. Interventions focusing more on motivation, interventions focusing more on spiritual approaches, interventions focusing more on how your thinking patterns, how that influences your behavior and skills, training people with the necessary skills.
You can either have a treatment for group therapy, and there are many groups. So different groups which are run by recovered addicts. And many people might actually prefer to receive help from a recovered addict because they sometimes think that the person has been in their shoes and they can learn from them. But then there's also the cognitive behavioral therapy, that's the talking therapies. And then you learn new ways of coping with your behavior, of looking at triggers. And then there's also family therapy. Family obviously plays a very big part in the recovery process. And then you can also have other holistic therapies, and different things work for different people as well.
The 12 steps is a spiritual approach. It works well for a large number of people.
Well, I think the strength of the 12-step program, it integrates an external structure with a developing spiritual reality. It brings God into the picture. It helps people to see that their lives need to have the bigger focus of having a connection with the spiritual self, with the spiritual God, and also then restructuring their lifestyle and the way they go about healing the relationships and the processes that have come unstuck.
For me, there's two things. There's a connection with a higher power, and then there's practicing spiritual principles. And I think, you know, from the moment that I got clean, I tried my best to practice spiritual principles, but the connection that I have with a higher power has been like a roller coaster. Some days it was quite strong and other days it wasn't there at all. And now this gift that I have is this constant, deep connection. I can't explain it. It's very personal and quite emotional for me, and it's new and it's very exciting.
I was lying there and I was like, how can I believe in something that I can't see? And like all of a sudden, like a scripture came to me that I read in the Bible, and it just like, it said God is life. And all of a sudden, like, you know, I just felt the wind like blowing over me, and I heard the birds, and I just had this awareness, and I opened my eyes and the leaves were going, and I just looked around me, and it's all there. You know, so I have these moments, you know, whereas when I was using drugs, I'd never have these moments of like connectedness and feeling like connected to this world, you know.
I told the truth, which was something that I haven't done in so long. There's actually hope. There's light, literally a light at the end of the tunnel, that you can live a drug-free life and be happy. There's open-mindedness, willingness, you know. I was willing to do anything to get my drugs. I'm willing to do anything to stay clean.
If it were a solution achievable through human means, it would have been conquered a long time ago, as in polio. And for the person watching this who may be an alcoholic or an addict, it would be so important to have that discussion of the possibility that there's an area there of powerlessness with someone that they really trust, with a church member, with a minister, with a friend, to just articulate, you know, I think I may have a problem with alcohol and drugs.
There's not just one route to recovery. There are many different routes. I think the important thing is to take responsibility when there is a problem, and as early on as possible.
Today I'm doing things that I've never done, like in the past, you know, I'm doing hikes, I'm climbing up mountains, I'm looking at sunsets, sunrises, which is the most beautiful thing ever.
I'm not running around in circles anymore.
And are open-minded to new ideas and new ways of doing things. That's a change.
The things that have happened in my life since I started this program, you know, sometimes you have the best dream in the world. Even in that wildest dream, I never had what I have today.
And you know, I get up in the morning and I'm really excited to do life.
In our next episode, we meet 4 people from different walks of life who have one thing in common. All of them started drinking alcohol from a young age and ended up as full-blown alcoholics. Our hope is that after watching these programs, anyone affected by the consequences of addiction, be it the addict themselves, family members, friends, work colleagues and communities at large, will better understand addiction and be able to make informed decisions regarding seeking help, advice, counseling and support.